So why does arrow weight matter? Well, there's a couple reasons. First, it starts off very simple physics equation. Mass, or the arrow weight, times velocity, or speed, equals momentum. And momentum with the right arrow mass will allow you to have a very, very effective arrow, a very killing arrow. But there's a lot of factors that go into that, right? When we talk about kinetic energy, for instance, there are very basic numbers that the industry-wide we look at. We look at kinetic energy to kill a deer, the minimum required. So we're talking youth hunters, we're talking across the spectrum, the minimum required to kill a deer, to break through that rib cage or double lung, on a good broadside shot, easy shot, is between 25 and 41 foot-pounds, right? Kinetic energy. That's what's required. That's not draw weight, that's kinetic energy. So on the flip side of that, we have momentum. Now, a lot of people are not familiar with momentum, but momentum is actually more important than kinetic energy, but it needs to be paired together to be effective, right? You need the right amount of kinetic energy, which gives you that whap when the arrow hits the deer, right? That energy that hits the deer. But momentum is what actually carries the arrow through the deer. It creates that force, that penetrating force that continues to propel your arrow after it launches from your bow. The one thing people don't realize is kinetic energy is maxed right at the bow. When you take that shot, your kinetic energy, that's as much as you're going to get right there. It depletes as that arrow flies toward your target, whereas momentum actually maintains and increases until it has a decrease in velocity enough to make it drop off. But you'll see here in a minute, while I show you a couple different things about kinetic energy, momentum, and how it factors into you and your arrows. So, hey, if you don't know me, my name's Mike Manley. I am a retired U.S. Army Green Beret. I know a lot about ballistics. I dealt with them a lot. And even if you're just a regular infantry guy, combat arms guy, or gal in the military, you learn a lot about weapon systems when you come in. It's a lot of things they teach you, make you memorize. They do it in things like expert infantryman's badge competition, where you can go through a bunch of stations, but you have to rattle off all these stats and stuff. And that's called, what is the maximum effective range of the weapon systems that you use? What's the maximum effective range of the 50 cal machine gun? What's that maximum effective range of your M4 assault rifle, right? They tell you all this stuff because that comes with a very specific military ammunition that's always going to be the same. That way they can tell you what's the maximum range of the weapon, which is different, the maximum range, but what the maximum effective range is, meaning where can you still kill or wound the enemy at a specific range with that weapon, having the confidence when you get behind it that you can do it. Archery's no different. But the biggest difference is, and like rifle hunting for deer, you can't put a 22 cartridge into a 30-06 rifle. And on the flip side, you can't put a 50 caliber round into a 30-06 either, right? It has to be specifically for that weapon. But in archery hunting with a bow, you can put almost any arrow weight into your bow and use it for hunting. Almost any. As long as you are using the right spine, you have the spine set for you, your bow, and your setup, you're good. It's no danger to you. You can shoot a low 300 grain arrow, right? Fly really fast, fly like a dart, but not really be great at penetration. The one thing that can't be argued is as arrow weight goes up and increases, the ability of that arrow to penetrate and drive through that animal is increased. Right? In fact, it's the same exact thing as what I talked about with a rifle or any other caliber weapon, right? You start off, if I'm shooting a 22 at a deer, I might be able to kill him, right? I might, if I hit him in the right spots, I take two shots or whatever, I might be able to kill him. But why would I use that when I can use the 30-06 I have sitting in the gun cabinet, and I can go out there and make sure when I shoot him, he's going down? It's about ethics, right? Right? We want to maximize the effectiveness of our arrows when they go down range. And a lot of people talk about, they go out and they'll buy a Matthews lift like I have over here. It shoots 348 feet per second, right? I have it set at 65 pounds. I only have a 26.5 inch draw length, right? And every time you drop draw length off of a bow with that factory setting, right, that 30-inch draw length or 32, whatever that bow's set to, every inch you drop down, you're dropping 10 feet per second in speed of the bow, right? But what does that mean? That means that the arrow you're shooting from your bow at a shorter draw length is not going to be the same as somebody with a larger draw length, right? It can be. You can shoot the same arrow, but you're going to have varying degrees of effectiveness with that arrow, right? As long as you have an arrow that's set up for you, has the right spine, like I said, but is also got a good broadhead on it and has a FOC, a forward of center, meaning the weight of the arrow is more forward towards the tip of the arrow in the 13 to 15% range. You can go higher, but that's general hunting arrow, optimized FOC industry standards, right? As long as you have that, your arrow is going to increase in effectiveness when that weight for the arrow is optimized for you and your setup. So when you look at your individual bow, right, your bow's IBO speed, adding in your draw weight, adding in your draw length are going to determine the optimal arrow weight for you. And that can be very, very different from all of you, right? It can be very different because you might have a hunting style where you are going to go out west, or you live out west, and you're shooting long range shots at animals, right? You need to have a good 40-yard shot, a good 60-yard shot, whatever that may be. Your arrow probably shouldn't be as heavy as somebody who's always hunting in a 30-yard or less scenario, right? You can, but it's not going to be optimized. Now, there's a way to go through a series of formulas, and I have automated calculators that can help you with this. In my next video, I'm going to take you through how to build out the perfect arrow for you, go through all the equations here, make it really easy. I promise there's no math. And you'll be able to quickly see exactly how to pick the right arrow weight for you. But before I do that, I'm going to go through a couple examples for you so you understand exactly what the requirements are and what the differences are in arrow weights and what they're carrying downrange with them. Now, earlier in the beginning of the video, I was talking about the fact that the amount of kinetic energy that you need to kill an animal, right? Kinetic energy is generally in that 25 to 41 foot-pounds, right, is a minimum required. We're not talking about the maximum or optimal, right? We're talking the minimum requirements. Generally speaking, it's an estimate. And when we look at momentum in slugs feet per second, which is how momentum's calculated, we're looking at around 0.207 to 0.305. It's a pretty big range. So that's still not a super, heavy momentum arrow. That's obviously going to be light, which, also takes into factors our youth hunters, people with short draw lengths like me, right? And all that goes into, having a baseline for you to look at when you are setting up your arrows and seeing where you stand with that, right? Well, and people can argue all day. They say, hey, I've been shooting 350 grain arrows my whole life. They kill just fine. That's great. But why do you go out and set your bow up by the most expensive bow in the world when the reality is this? Your bow doesn't kill the deer. Your arrow does. So don't go cheap on your arrows. Make sure your arrows are optimized to be as effective as that bow is. So let's look at a few examples. All right, I'm going to look over my board here and talk through a few examples, like I said, but let's start with the baseline. All these figures I'm giving you are based on my setup. I have a Matthews lift with an IBO speed, like I said, of 348 feet per second. I have a 26.5 inch draw length. I'm not a big guy. And I'm shooting 65 pounds of draw weight, right? All those things together give me a baseline. Now, I also throw in some factors like how much weight I have in my bowstring and things like that. So I've added about 20 grains of weight to that to factor in to my peep and some other stuff on the bowstring. So those are factors as well. But now we look at the total arrow weight, right? I'm not talking about without broadhead. I'm talking with broadhead, your fletchings, your knock, everything on the arrow. This is total weight. We start off with, like I said, 350 grains. A 350 grain arrow, a very light arrow, is going to fly very fast. With my setup, even though my bow is capable of an IBO speed of 348 feet per second with my settings, right, I've already taken it down to 298 feet per second, right? 298 with a 350 grain arrow, right? So that is still fast. That is still fast. A lot of youth are going out there killing deer with bows that are shooting down around 200 feet per second, all right, even under. So say, okay, we had the 350 grain arrow at 290 FPS. That arrow is shooting 69 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, right? Way more than enough to kill a deer, right? Supposedly. But the factor we have to put in there is the mass of the arrow, right? That's the thing that's left out of this. The mass of the arrow. If you're throwing a toothpick, at your buddy, it might pierce the skin if you throw hard enough, but generally it's not going to, right? You throw a Bowie knife at him at the same distance, he ain't gonna be happy. It's the same concept. So now we have 69 foot-pounds and we have 0.63 slug FPS. Now, if you remember what I said about the minimums with that, remember the minimums were 25 to 41 foot-pounds of kinetic energy as a minimum, and 0.207 to 0.305 slug FPS. So at 69 foot-pounds and 0.463 slug FPS, we are way good enough to kill a deer, right? Way good enough. But we're still not optimized, right? We can do better. So if you look at, we'll go to the other end of the spectrum, like what I have here. Let me pull it up here. So what we have here is an arrow I used that was way too heavy for me. It was 605 grain arrow, right? With the setup I talk about here, 605 grain arrow. And the reason that it's not great for me is because of the trajectory, right? This has a lot of arc to it, even at 30 yards. The drop, I think, from 20 to 30 yards was like 8 inches or something crazy. So it was a lot. So when you're trying to, maximize your effectiveness, even at close ranges, if an arrow is dropping like that on you and not optimized for you, that's going to be way too heavy. But I mean, everything about it, the mass of this is excellent. The mass and the capabilities of this arrow are excellent at those close ranges. Get inside 20, it's shooting 60.94 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Really good, right? Because we talked about the minimums, 25 to 41, right? And the slug FPS has now gone from what that 350 grain was 0.463 up to 0.572. We almost went over 100 slug FPS, right? So we really increased our momentum, right? That mass of that arrow is showing us just through these calculations that we have a more, deadly arrow because of that. It has great kinetic energy, but it is flying hard. It is going to be, has maximum penetrating capability. But like I said, I'm still not happy with this arrow. So I'll show you an example here. An arrow I built this year, working with the Victory VAP TKO Elites. I put on a 95 grain insert to this, and I'm using a 150 grain broadhead, right? So I have a field point on here now. So this arrow is 505 grains. So a whole 100 grains less than the arrow I was just talking about, the 605 grain, right? That 605 grain arrow was shooting 213 feet per second. Slow, like I said, slow. That 505 grain arrow is now shooting 246, right? So that's a good speed. That's not a bad speed. You might be saying, oh my God, 246. But think about what I told you before. As soon as you change the settings on your bow, things really drop a lot. But we go back to it. So that 505 grain arrow is shooting 67.85 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Excellent, excellent. And it's at 0.552. Still way higher than that 0.463 slug FPS we talked about with the 350 grain arrow, right? Big difference. Now, another arrow I had built here was this other arrow here is 530 grains, right? So I said I wanted to try to see where I was at with a little bit more weight. because at close in ranges, I just wanted to optimize that kinetic energy, but the momentum and the mass be fantastic. Another 150 grain broadhead. My FOC on this arrow is 17%. It's rocking. So that arrow, 238 feet per second in speed. So it's not fantastic on speed, but I can tell you from shooting them, they still shoot pretty good. Inside that 30-yard window, right? I'm golden. Now, if I wanted to go out at distance, if I'm shooting targets or game, deer, elk, whatever, I need to really, lighten my arrow up a little bit to increase its effectiveness at range. Does that make sense? Right? I still want to maximize the effectiveness of my arrow for the target that I am going after, for the game that I'm hunting and the style of hunting that I have, right? So in essence, I could go down and shoot a 423 grain arrow. If I went to 423, my kinetic energy, that's about peak for me in that setup. It's 70.5 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. You can see how it ranges there, how it went from 69 at 350 and up to over 70 at 423 grains, right? That's almost 75 grains. And the slug FPS is 0.515. So quite a bit more than that 350 grain arrow that was 0.463. So it's a big difference. You can see even that little bit of weight increase can help you. So if you push up over 450 grains, 475, really depends on you, your setup, draw weight, draw length, all those things. In the next video, I'm going to go through my process, how I work to get the perfect arrow weight for me. And then you can take it, see exactly what I do, and then work out the best arrow weight for you and how you hunt. Right? It's the bad thing with this is that we can't go out and build 50 arrows and try to, shoot all of them and see which one works the best. That's not always possible. But with this, you get an estimate. It puts you in the ballpark, right? Give or take 20 grains on the arrow to what's the best arrow weight for you, and understanding that this is all about one thing. Right? It's not saying that, 650 grain arrows are the best, which they might be if you're 6'3", have a 30 inch draw length and shooting 80 pounds. You might be rocking and tearing stuff up, and 650 is nothing for you. Right? But that's why this is so important, right? You can optimize with everything that you're doing, right? From how you're shooting your bow, to that arrow, to your broadhead. Everybody's worried about all this stuff, but they're forgetting about how to optimize their arrows for hunting. So I hope you take this information I have. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. I know there's something I probably left out. So we can talk about it, and then wait for that next video where I talk about how to build the perfect arrow for you. So once again, I'm Mike. This is the Everyday Bow Hunter, and I will see you next time.